Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology on YouTube. That's Bob over there in freezing cold Missouri. And I'm Scott here sweating like crazy on hot, humid Florida Sunday afternoon. So we're miles apart in our comfort level here. He's running the heater and I'm running the air conditioner. Okay, today we're going to talk about Mad Dogs and Englishmen, the Joe Cocker live album that was released in 1970. This was a double album that was recorded during four shows at the Fillmore East in New York around Easter weekend. I think of probably Easter weekend of 1969 or 1970. I'm not sure. It was in 1970, March of 1970. And then the album was released in August of 1970. This was part of a big project. It was a double album with cuts taken from these shows. They also filmed a movie, released a movie of the tour that we're not going to talk about today. We'll just mention a little bit, but we're going to talk about this record. This is the original version of the album that we're going to discuss today, a double album. There have been two repackaging of this stuff in the meantime. In 2005, this was released as a bigger edition, where what they did was they took those same four show recordings from those same four shows, added a few more songs to it, and then resequenced everything to put it in a more correct order the way that it was done during the shows. This original album wasn't necessarily in any sequence. They just sequenced it like an album, not according to the way the show was done. In 2005, they released the deluxe edition that was sequenced more like the original shows. And then in 2006, I see here, a 6-disc box set was released under the title Mad Dogs and Englishmen, the complete Fillmore East concerts. What this one was a complete recordings of all four of the Fillmore East shows. So there was a lot of, obviously there was a lot of, duplication of songs and things like that. I mean, these are just the complete shows of the four shows in 2 nights. Anyway, this was Cocker's first live album. He had recorded. He was still early in his career. He had just recorded 2 studio albums before this came out. He had made a name for himself at Woodstock. So, and then Mad Dogs and Englishmen became his biggest selling album. It still is to this day as his biggest selling album. So Cocker really all along was always known more as a live performer than actually a studio performer. His biggest success came from his live recordings and his live shows. And that's what people mostly know him about. Anyway, that's the background on the album. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob to tell us his history and what his opinion is of this album.
Thanks, Scott. So since we're talking about the original album, I had to get this out. And now, real quickly, I love my Apple Music, okay? But I really miss the days when you got album artwork.
Absolutely.
Like this, and all the pictures here on the back. And then you opened up the gatefold of the album and you had this. Then you can fold it out and have 4 12-by-12 pages of photos and stuff. All of that enclosed in the double album set. And I just wanted to throw that out real quick. Just to say
this was a big release for A&M Records. I mean, they made a big deal out of this with the accompanying movie and the double disc album, and it was really like a coffee table thing. Like you have the coffee table books that are just put out for display, and that's pretty much what this was. This wasn't just your normal run-of-the-mill album release. They made a big package of it.
Yeah, and so anyway, the reason that I wanted to talk about this is that album had a big impact on me back in the day. I loved the music. I first became aware of Joe Cocker from the Woodstock movie and his performance of with a little help from my friends. And so this same thing, I got introduced to this through the movie, and a lot of the music on this album is in the same vein as what he did with a little help from my friends. It's got his unique take on it. Joe Cocker's vocals were very unique, obviously, and the way he reworked the songs musically. Brought in a lot of horns, brought in a lot of other stuff. So I love the arrangements on the songs. And this whole Mad Dogs and Englishmen thing was almost an accident. You know, Cocker's got committed to a tour that he didn't know he was going to be doing. And he had disbanded his band called the Grease Band because they didn't really want to tour. So suddenly he's committed to a tour by his record company with no band to back him up. In steps Leon Russell. Russell and Cocker had a connection before because Cocker had recorded Russell's songs like Delta Lady. And so Leon Russell steps in and puts this whole thing together to do this tour. And they ultimately wound up, I think, with 40 some odd musicians who went on this tour. Most of them were studio guys and women that normally never got to perform on stage. And they literally had a circus on stage. I mean, you know, it's like watching a three-ring circus. You've got a horn section over here and a big percussion section over here and backup singers over here. And I mean, the stage is just full of people. Yeah. And it was a beautiful mess that I think just worked great. And I know some critics didn't like it because they said it sounds like something that got put together in a couple weeks time. But I like that from it.
That was the beauty of it.
Yes,
exactly. That was the beauty of it.
It was spontaneous. It was a bunch of people on stage having a fantastic time. And you could tell, and if you watch the movie, you've got a lot of studio musicians who never got to be on stage before, and they're having the time of their life. Mm-hmm. And Leon Russell was a musical genius. I mean, the guy worked in so many different genres. He was a songwriter. He was a great performer himself, wonderful engineer and producer. So I think it's just a fun thing to listen to. And again, like I say, I love Cocker's vocals. I like the arrangements for the songs they put together. And I know one of the criticisms for Cocker was that he didn't write a lot of his own material, but the guy had a great ear for picking songs, and he did a great job of rearranging them and making them his own. And it's like, I don't even think of With a Little Help from My Friends anymore as a Beatles song. I think of it as a Joe Cocker song. You know, he's got the definitive version of that song, and he's got definitive versions of this. This album gave him his first top 10 hit with The Letter, which is kind of unusual to get that kind of a hit song off of a live album. So it did a lot for his career, and I think it brought a lot of people into his fan base.
You know, The Letter, since you brought it up, the Letter was a big hit single released ahead of this album. In fact, that was my first exposure to Cocker was The Letter. And but that version of The Letter that became a hit single was not lifted from this album. That version of The Letter was recorded during rehearsals for this tour.
Correct.
And so if you listen to that and then compare it to the performance that's on this album, they're two different performances. He followed it up with a single, Crimea River, which is a cover of a old Julie London song that was pulled directly from this album. That it wasn't as big a hit as The Letter, but it hit the charts pretty well. This is really a Leon Russell project. Yeah, I mean, you can tell by listening to it that this has Leon Russell's stamp all over it. We didn't understand that at the time because Leon wasn't a star back then. He was he was pretty active in the music business. He himself being a studio musician, he was part of that whole core of studio musicians that used to record for Elvis and for all those late 50s and early 60s recording artists. So he knew all these people. This is just a collection of friends that he's collected over the course of several years. A lot of them, I believe, were from the collective that was Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. If you remember that. In fact, Leon was big with Delaney and Bonnie, and a lot of these people came from that collective. And there are a lot of names that have since become familiar names, if not, none of them ever became stars, but a couple of them became. Rita Coolidge was there, Claudia Lanier, Bobby Keys, who was a sax player for the Stones for a while, who just passed a couple of years ago. Yeah, you go through this. Now Cocker never. I don't remember that he took a lot of criticism for not writing songs, but that's never what he was. I mean, a lot of rock and roll, young rock and roll fans back then, probably looked down on him for that. But Cocker was not a songwriter. He released the studio album, his follow-up to Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which took a couple of years for him to release it. But he wrote about half the songs on that album, I remember, as a self-titled album. And it was pretty good, more blues oriented. But Cocker was he was a cover artist. He was not a songwriter. He was a cover artist. I mean, you look down the list of songs on this album alone. It opens with Honky Tonk Woman, the Rolling Stones song. We go to Crimea River, which is an old Julie London song. Leonard Cohen, Bird on the Wire, Traffic, Feeling All Right. There's the Leon Russell composition called Superstar, which later became a big hit for the Carpenters. You got Ashford and Simpson covered on here, Isaac Hayes, Otis Redding, Ray Charles, Dylan, the Beatles, of course. And of course, The Letter was a cover of a Box Top song. There is every song on this album is a cover, except for a couple of them that were, even the Leon Russell songs were covers because somebody else recorded those before Cocker did.
Well, Delta Lady was on a Cocker studio album before.
Right. Yeah, and Delta Lady, which was written about
Rita Coolidge,
who was Leon Russell's girlfriend at the time. I just recently saw an interview on YouTube with Rita Coolidge that was recorded just in the past couple of years, and she was reminiscing a lot about this. You talk about how this tour was just a bunch of studio musicians out on tour having a good time. Rita Coolidge said it wasn't that good of a time. She said that people were just threatening all the time. It's like, stop this thing, stop the world, I want to get off. It said it was just this long, grueling, overwhelming tour. And I said by the end of it, they were all happy that it was over with. In fact, it's been documented that Cocker started having some pretty serious substance abuse issues and emotional issues coming off of this tour because it just beat him down. It just beat him down emotionally and physically so badly.
Well, I don't know if anybody can really truly say that they love touring.
Yeah.
And that's why Cocker didn't have musicians ready for this, because his previous band didn't want to tour.
Cocker didn't want to tour either. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just his previous band. He didn't want to tour either. He had just gotten back from Woodstock, and he went back home, and he recorded a couple studio albums where he just covered other people. Went in the studio, got some songs together, went to studio, recorded them, sold some records, and he was happy with that. He wanted to stay home. He didn't want to go on tour either. But yeah, his management company or his record company or somebody put together this tour without him knowing about it. And they called him up and said, "You're going out on tour."
Yeah.
And
He was
and they say, and it really beat him down. It really it caused some problems for him for a lot of years. It took him a long time to recover from that, both emotionally and physically, apparently, from reading about it. But yeah, I mean, there's not a whole heck of a lot to say about this album, except it's just balls to the wall rock and blues, you know. And it's you know, Cocker he's such a marvelous singer. I mean, he could sing in just a nice, beautiful, smooth voice, but then he'd open up his throat and his lungs, and he could yell and scream with the best of them. And it's all here. You hear everything here. You know, there's 4 drummers on this tour. There's 4 people on stage playing drums on this. There are like I don't know, there's 7 or 8 horn players. I think there's like a dozen backup singers, a dozen people who are doing nothing but standing on stage behind a microphone and singing. And a lot of I mean, you can hear that on this album. It is all on this vinyl. I was listening to this album. I used to listen to this album all the time when it first came out when I was a kid. I was still in high school when it came out, and it was one of my top go-to albums when it came out. I love this thing, but I haven't listened to it too much over the intervening years, but I listened to it just to refresh my memory about it a few days ago, and and everything was right there. I mean, my opinion didn't change a whit from listening to it for the first time this week than in a long time. It really holds up. It holds up well. But the point I was about to make is especially on the song "Feeling All Right," the Traffic song. I mean, you can when the chorus comes in and the background vocals, you could hear every single one of those 12 voices singing those little backup harmonies. It's really cool. It's really cool. I have a lot of stuff going on stage. If you watch the movie, you see in the movie, I mean, it did look like when they were on stage, it just looked like a big, gigantic block party going on stage. Like everybody from the neighborhood showed up, and they just handed them an instrument, said, "Here, you play this, you stand behind this microphone over here," and it was really very entertaining. Very entertaining.
I can almost imagine somebody telling Leon, "Hey, the stage tomorrow's got 20 more square feet than the last one. Okay, let's put some more people on."
That's right.
Yeah.
The movie, if you can find the movie, I have it on DVD. Where the album is more a document of the 4 shows at the Fillmore East on that weekend. The movie is a document of the trip. I mean, you see them riding on buses, you see them getting on buses, you see them riding on airplanes, you see them filing into radio stations for radio interviews and things like that. I mean, you get a sense of what the tour was by watching the movie. And then, of course, you know, they drop a lot of concert footage in there, which is really entertaining. But yeah, Cocker's first 2 albums before this, I did go and pick those up after I became a fan of this album. But I went back and picked up the first 2 Cocker studio albums, and you know they were fine for what they are. They're fine, but this is it. If you know, if you have never heard a Joe Cocker album and want to know what Joe Cocker is all about, this is definitely the Joe Cocker album. Everything else just pales in comparison to this, which is really odd. I mean, how many live albums can you say that about? That the live album was a pinnacle of somebody's recording career, especially somebody who was as successful and had as long a career as Cocker ultimately had. Still, this live album is the Joe Cocker album to get.
Yeah. You know, later on in his career, when he sobered up and started doing his pop duets and stuff. You know, he had a good career then, got higher rating songs and stuff. But I think this is the essential Joe Cocker.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, this is the Joe Cocker you need to hear, not the Love Lifted Me Up Higher Joe Cocker.
Yeah, he had a couple of, I think he had a couple of singles that went to #1 after this.
After this, right? But
yeah, before this, he had, you know, The Letter and Crimea River were. I think I'm not sure how high The Letter went, but they both were in the top 40. The Letter might have hit the top 20. I'm not sure. And a couple of singles from his first album, I think, were probably hits in the United Kingdom. But he did have a couple of #1s after that, and had a good, successful, and pretty long career after this. But this is Mad Dogs and Englishmen is Joe Cocker at his rock and roll best.
Amen.
There's not a fault I can find with this record. You have a couple bonuses here. You do have Rita Coolidge singing Superstar, and then you have Cocker and Russell sang a duet on the Dylan song "Girl from the North Country," I think, which is from Nashville Skyline, from the Dylan album Nashville Skyline. That Dylan actually recorded that as a duet with Johnny Cash. But this is a duet between Cocker and Russell. Fabulous stuff. If you want to hear some good rock and soul and blues, pick up Mad Dogs and Englishmen. And if you can find the movie, find the movie. That's quite an entertaining movie too.
And you know, and Girl from the North Country has a special meaning to me since my wife is from Michigan, so it's kind of our song.
You're North Country girl.
North Country girl, right?
Okay.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly, Scott. It works and it works.
Mm-hmm.
If I had a complaint, the only complaint I would have is they don't have With a Little Help from My Friends on the album, but I can understand why it's not on there, but that's probably my only complaint.
I'm trying to remember if in the movie, I don't think they performed that in the movie. They performed songs that I remember from they did have Claudia Lanier singing something, another Beatles song in the movie. I do remember that. But yeah,
which is odd when you think that I don't think Cocker had that much of a standing in the U.S. until Woodstock, you know, and With a Little Help from My Friends put him on the map in this country, and that gave him his start. Like I say, I haven't looked at what his album sales were like, but I think it was Woodstock that really put him over the top.
Oh, Woodstock broke him in the U.S.
Yeah,
there's no question about that. Yeah, he had recorded the first album With a Little Help from My Friends is the name of the first album. He had recorded that and released it, and it was a minor hit in Britain before Woodstock happened. And then I think a second album, which is another self-titled. He had 2 self-titled albums. The second album was recorded and released after Woodstock, and it got a bit of a bump in the album charts from that. But this is the album that made Cocker a star, with Mad Dogs and Englishmen. They also released recently. There was an album released of Cocker's entire Woodstock performance that I've listened to.
It's on Apple Music.
Yeah. That is also, I mean, that's worth listening to also. That's just a couple years earlier than Mad Dogs and Englishmen, but it's in the same vein, but with a tighter band. That was with the Grease Band, which is like a 6-piece band or something. Yeah. But basically a rock band behind them. Anything else about Mad Dogs and Englishmen? About Joe Cocker?
I think we beat it to death, other than I just can't.
Well, we didn't beat it to death. There's just not a lot to say about it, except it's just a great album. It's just a great.
I would recommend anyone
nice nugget from 1970.
Yeah, I would recommend that anyone not old enough to remember this, to go check it out. And on a side note, if you're young, just for the heck of it, once you get a chance to see what Joe Cocker looked like on stage, go to YouTube and look up Cocker and John Belushi from Saturday Night Live. And
Yeah,
that was an entertaining video to watch.
yeah, that was a few years later, and that was when Cocker had
76,
actually sobered. He was on his way to he was sobering up, and he was getting his act together, and he showed up on Saturday night and did that. But that was John Belushi in that performance. John Belushi was more Joe Cocker than Joe Cocker was Joe.
Yes, he actually wound up.
Cocker had pretty much calmed down by then. Yeah, if you've never seen Joe Cocker perform live, definitely check out Woodstock or check out the Mad Dogs and Englishmen movie. You're in for a treat. He was as dynamic a visual performer as he was a singer.
Although you kept being worried that he was going to have a seizure.
It's like he was having a seizure every moment he's on stage. He was having a seizure.
Yeah, and pulling the hair, and yeah, he was not only a great singer, but he was entertaining. Until he sobered up.
What are you working on for the blog this week, Bob?
What am I working on? I'm actually going off on a weird direction. It's not rock and roll, but I'm trying to work on something right now involving Woody Guthrie.
Woody Guthrie,
yes. Specifically, I picked up way a long time ago, 2 albums that were recorded from 2 different concerts that were tributes to Woody Guthrie that occurred about a year or so after his death. The first set was recorded in New York, and then there was a follow-up one done over in California. And I picked up both albums way back in my youth, and they really meant a lot to me back in the time because of the history of my family. So I'm trying to draw all that together.
Okay, I'm looking forward to reading that. I promised last week a piece on the 2010 era indie band out of Portland, Oregon, and Viva Voce. I'm planning on having something on that this week. And since we've decided that we're going to hit on the Velvet Underground next week, we're going to talk about the album Loaded next week. I'm going to go ahead and start pulling together a couple of blog posts about the Velvets. Bob and I both knew when we started this blog a few months ago that this was coming. Well, it's time. It's time for me to start saying my piece about the Velvet Underground.
I'm surprised you showed restraint for so long.
Well, there's a few other things I wanted to get out of my system first. Okay, well, thanks for joining us this week. Come visit us again next week when we talk about the Velvet Underground's Loaded. Bob's gonna listen and learn the album. I know the thing backward and forward, so I'll just have a little refresher course. But I think Bob's gonna get schooled on it a little bit this week, and come back next week and hear what Bob has to say about it. Okay, thanks, Bob. We'll see you next week.
All right, take care, Scott.
Bye.